And
Oh, well. All right. Well, thanks for being here, everyone. All right. I'm excited to see you. Today is Wednesday. It is the 4th of December. I don't know where time is going. And we're going to share some sources on Parshas Vayetze that's coming up. And I'm glad to see that you're here. And a welcome to all those who are here virtually as well. Unlike other weeks where I tried to go and find sources, a couple of Divrei Torah to share throughout the Parsha, I just, as I hit the first one this week, it just started triggering different memories and stuff, all really revolving around this one Divrei Torah. So it's going to be on this one theme, but we're going to see several sources. And I think this is going to be fascinating. It's going to be a little bit historical as well. So let's jump right in. So Parshas Vayetze begins, as we know last week in Toldos, Yaakov, the parsha ended that Yaakov had taken those brachos that Yitzchak had intended to give to Esav. Esav is furious at him for this, and Yaakov's got to leave town, both because of the fact it's in his own self-preservation interest, but also because his parents both told him, "We don't want you marrying a local girl. We want you going back to Rivka's family in Padan Aram, and that's where you're going to find a nice wife. He ends up finding four, but that's what his mission to go back there. So that's at the beginning of Parshas Vayetze, and on his way out of Israel or Canaan at that time, on his way out, he lays down and he has a dream at night. It's a prophetic vision. Hashem, he sees the angels going up and down, but also Hashem speaks to him that night. And when he wakes up in the morning, he realizes something awesome has happened and he makes the following vow. So that's where we're going to begin today. It's in Perach Chav Ches, that's chapter 28. We're looking at those three psukim, Chav, Chav Aleph, and Chav Beis, 20 through 22. So he says, Vaidar Yaakov neder lemor. Yaakov makes the following vow. Im yelo madi, if God is with me, because he doesn't know how long he's going to be gone for, and he knows he's leaving all of his familiar zone in Israel, his family, his yeshiva, Shem Vever, everything. So he says, I'm going in foreign territory. He says, if God will be with me during this process, Ushmarani baderech hazeh, and he watches over with me on my way, Asher Nuchi Holech, that I'm going, then Asan li lechem lachol beged lobosh. And he helps me with the bare necessities. He wasn't asking for luxuries. He says, I need to just make sure that I'm fed and that I have clothes to wear. He says, that's all I'm asking for you, God. Just keep me safe. Make sure that I'm not starving and that I'm not naked. I've got clothes to wear. If that all works, Vishavti b'shalom avi, and whenever this process ends, I'm able to return to my parents' house. V'haya Hashem lila elokim, and the Lord will be my God. Then ha'evan azos, then this stone, asher samti matzeva. Remember, because when he woke up, he set up all the stones that he'd been sleeping on. He set them up as a monument. He says, then this stone, which I've created as a monument, yeah, Beis Elokim. I'm going to designate it to be a house of God, meaning I'm going to do something special here. I'll teach about God. I'll bring korbanos here. And that ends up that's Har Moriah, because that's where he had gone to sleep. So he says this is going to be a Beis Elokim, and then lastly, v'chol asher titenli, anything which God gives me, aser asranu lach, I will tithe to you, meaning to God. I'm going to put it towards godly work, whether that means as korbanos, whether that means as charitable efforts to take care of God's people, God's children, or to teach the world more about God. I'm going to find godly work to do with a tithe, with 10% of whatever income that I earn. That's the pledge that Yaakov makes before he leaves the land of Canaan, before he goes to his uncle Lavan. Okay, so we're going to see the last couple of weeks. I've found some Divrei Torah, and I've explained this that my Layla and I were visiting my mother-in-law in the summer, and she asked me if there was any Sfarim that I might want on my late father-in-law's bookshelf. So I took two small sets. One was a set called Tam Vadas, was a 3-volume set, and it was by Rabbi Moshe Sternbach, who lives in Yerushalayim. I believe he wrote this when he still lived in Johannesburg. He was a rabbi of a large Ashkenazi community in Johannesburg, and before he moved to Israel, I don't know exactly when he made that aliyah, but these are 3 volumes he has on the Chumash. I believe these again were written when he still lived in Johannesburg. So I've been looking at those farm a lot this year because I've got a new set. So why not see what his Divrei Torah on the Parsha is? But a lot of times, and we'll see here, besides for seeing what Rabbi Sternbach's going to share, it also serves as as a jumping board, as a diving board, because it'll trigger my memory or get us to some other sources. So let's see. He's going on this idea of the Meiser, the fact that he pledged, that Yaakov pledged at the end of his vow that any income that he had, if God was with him, the way he would show his appreciation would be by tithing and sharing it in godly work, godly endeavors. So let's see. He's going on that last vow. Nira Ladayek, it looks like you can make the following inference. So he's going to say you can make the following inference. D'chiyuv meiser lav dafka b'mamon. In other words, it's not just when it comes to money. Because again, what did Yaakov say? Yaakov didn't say, okay, whatever cash comes in, I'll tithe. He says, kol asher titenli. Anything that God gives me, I'll make sure to tithe. So Rabbi Sternbach's going to say, it seems from this, you could be medayek, you can infer that Meiser doesn't just refer to money. Elami kol masha kadosh baruch hu chonena sadam. Whatever it is that God, through His grace, shares with a person, afilu min hachachma, even if it's not material, even if it's wisdom that God has given someone, shenitna lo tzarich la'aser, a person also should tithe, meaning find some time. If I can't share material resources, I could donate my volunteer time. I could donate my tutoring time, whatever skills that I have. I can find a way to share that with others who may be in need. We shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that tzedakah and meiser is just about money, because then that would mean if a person doesn't have extra resources, okay, they're not involved with tzedakah. He says it seems from this, because Yaakov says, kol asher titenli, whatever it is that you give me, I'm going to tithe. That tithing and tzedakah applies beyond finances, beyond monetary sources, but any other way we can be helpful. Let's see what he says. Uscharo shezocha lebracha v'hatzlacha. And what's the schar? What is the reward for tithing all that we have, whether that means our material assets or whether it means whatever skills, talents, time I might be able to volunteer and share with others, that the reward for that is that we will merit bracha v'hatzlacha, blessing and success. Because the same way that we say when it comes to Meiser, aser b'shvil shetis asher, that we should tithe in order that we become rich. We're going to see. He's going to refer to that soon. Is that there's a special. It says aser to aser. It says in the Torah when it comes about tithing. So Chazal darshan that in the Gemara, aser b'shvil shetis asher, tithe in order that we should become wealthy, that there's a reward. What we give away, Hashem will make certain that comes back our way. I once heard someone express it beautifully. The only thing we keep is that which we give away. It's a nice way to say it. But basically saying that's not just when it comes to monetary issues, but also when it comes to whatever skill we have. God will see to it that I didn't waste my time by sharing with others, that it came back to me and I will be paid back. Now he says, V'chein shamati, and I also heard this over Moreno Rabbeinu. I believe that abbreviation is Hagon Rav Meir Shapiro Zatzal. Rav Meir Shapiro was other than just the founder of Daf Yomi, that's what people know about him as the Rav in Lublin, Poland, but he also set up that large yeshiva, Chachmei Lublin, that stood for, he only merited to see it for the last couple of years of his life, because he passed away relatively young. But it was functioning till the Holocaust. In fact, the building still stands. The Nazis occupied it, and then after the Polish defeated, when Poland, after the war, when Poland was independent again, I think it became a medical school because it was such a grand building that he had built, and it was very unique for that time. There was no yeshiva in Poland that had such a well-made, well constructed building. And
did you show us a picture of
I
that?
think so. And it was refurbished over the last couple of years because the Polish government gave it back to the Jewish community. So not only is it a place that visitors and tourists go to, I believe there's a functioning shul there. And I think there's a yeshiva once again functioning there, because even though there's not much in the way of Polish Jews, there was a lot of Jews who came over once the Soviet Union collapsed, who made their way to Poland. So I believe it's once again functioning as it was given back to the Jewish community.
So it's not a medical something anymore?
No, the Polish government gave it back to I think within the last 10 years or so. They gave it, and there was an effort made that it had to be refurbished, and it's in use once again. Every now and then you'll see these pictures or videos from Jewish tours who go on these heritage tours to Europe. They'll stop in to the Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, and they just overcome with emotion, and they'll feel obliged to everyone sit down, let's say a shir, a Divrei Torah, or something like that, and sing and dance in there. It's a real Am Yisrael Chai kind of experience there. It's really really beautiful. But I believe there is a functioning yeshiva that's there. Now again, that it might be an elementary school, whatever, but in order for those refugee families from the Soviet Union who ended up there. So he says, "Chen shemati memorenu v'Rabbeinu Agon Rav Meir Shapiro Zatzal, v'hu atzmo, he himself in the yeshiva that he established called Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, he set up the following practice: Shebnei HaYeshiva, that the members of his yeshiva ya'aniku sha'al liyom la'azor la'acherim lahachkim. Everyone had to donate an hour of their time daily to learn with others to help make them smarter. Meaning, if there was a weaker student, so now, which again, when you read about what the entrance exam was to Yeshiva Lublin, and I once remember speaking to a Polish Holocaust survivor that we knew, and he was just devastated because he had gotten accepted, and then the war broke out, so he never was able to go. And it was just this wild thing about how much they had to know about Pal, how much they had to know by heart. So it's just wondering, like, who were these weaker students in the place? Unless he didn't mean in the yeshiva, could have just meant in the town of Lublin. Maybe 1 hour a day they had some kind of Big Brother time where little kids would come and study what yeshiva Bachman. I don't know exactly what this program looked like, but he says part of the process was an hour a day. They had to learn with weaker students. The kina azmanazeh, and they gave a nickname for this time, b'shem avodas hakodesh. This was called, everything we were doing all day long, that was avodas Hashem. But learning with young kids or weaker kids, that was avodas hakodesh. That was holy time. In other words, there was something really special about that. L'dvarav, and according to him, what he would say over, Yizku b'zel hatzlacha b'limud. He would tell the students, if you want to have hatzlacha, if you want to have success in your learning, the way to trigger that success is basically how you need God's blessings. How are you going to earn God's blessing? By showing God that I'm willing to share my Torah learning with someone weaker than me, with someone who knows less than me, and that's how it would come their way success. So apparently Rameir Shapiro had such a program set up in his yeshiva. I remember when I was in yeshiva, they had something that was once a week. There was an organization in New York. It still is around. It was called JEP. It stood for a Jewish Educational Program. And the basic idea is that New York State had it that in the public schools, they were allowed, obviously there had to be this church-state separation, so they didn't have religious study in school, but they were allowed 1 hour a week. Kids were able to leave the public school, get picked up by whatever religious denomination, religious club it was. They had to go off campus because they couldn't have religious study in school. So to go to some nearby location for some kind of religious club. So it wasn't like strict Sunday school kind of thing. It was almost like summer camp. Do you have it? It was called release time, right? It was release time. So and I don't know if everyone used it. In other words, that was the last hour of the school day. In other words, let's say school was supposed to end at 3, so they would end at 2, and that last. Now, I don't know if everyone used it for religious instruction, because let's say you had a family that didn't particularly care. Yeah, there were probably different clubs, enrichment clubs or something like that, But if a family wanted religious instruction, it could be during that time. So I remember in Queens, that's where I was in yeshiva in Chavetz Chaim. They had a very active Queens JEP, and they would send guys to various public schools around Queens. It was elementary age kids. It was during our lunch break, I remember, and we'd basically go to some nearby shul or JCC. It was something that was close to the public school. Most of the time, these were immigrant families from the Soviet Union who would come over. The kids were in public school, and for a lot of them, this was their only exposure they were ever having to any kind of Jewish, fun Jewish educational experience. And obviously that wasn't the end all. The ultimate goal was they would have a Shabbaton every now and then, bring the kids in, and then there was summer camp, and the ultimate goal would hopefully get these kids into Jewish schools. They had over the years lots and lots of successes with that. Obviously not every kid, but they had a lot of success. But I remember it was pretty exhausting. It was like one lunch a week, and there were a lot of guys who were exhausted, but they would really push it. Say it's a massive chesed, and they would quote when they would push this JEP thing to get the guys involved. They would quote some of the sources I'm going to share with you soon. But anyhow, I just found this fascinating to see that this could have begun with Rav Meir Shapiro. I think that's fascinating. Let's see the next paragraph. He says, Va'achshav Ra'isi. So Rav Sternbuch writes, and now I've seen Mitalmidei Agon Rav Shimon Shkop. Rav Shimon Shkop was one of the premier Roshei Yeshiva in Lithuania before the Holocaust. He died shortly before the Holocaust. His famous yeshiva was in Grodno. Grodno, I think it was actually Poland, but all the Jews consider it Lita. That was part of the historic Lithuania. Prior to that, he had been one of Rosh Yeshivas in Tels in Lithuania. And also, he spent either 1 year or 2 years, I don't remember the number, here in America, giving shiurim. At that time, it wasn't yeshiva. It wasn't known as Yeshiva University yet because they hadn't formally had a yeshiva, a college program. It was just Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. It was on the Lower East Side at that time, and he was a visiting Rosh Yeshiva who was there for a year or two. You guys would go to school at night. They didn't have a formal college program in the yeshiva. If guys wanted, they would go to one of the city colleges at night. It was when they moved to Washington Heights. I think it was in the 30s that it officially became Yeshiva College, and in the format, officially had a college in the yeshiva. But until that point, it was Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan Ritz. It was one of the only yeshivas in America, and Rav Shimon Shkop spent either 1 year or 2 years, I don't remember, as a visiting European Rosh Yeshiva there until he went back to Europe, and he passed away of old age shortly before the Holocaust. So he says here, "Va'achshav ra'isi mitalmidei Agon Rav Shimon Shkop." Zatzal. He says, now I saw that some of the students of Rav Shimon Shkop, here's what they said over in his name. Just like when Chazal tell us that when it comes to giving tithing with our funds, with our material resources, there's a segula, there's a special guarantee that God will bless us with other forms of wealth. And there's, again, because it said aser ta'aser, and Chazal darshan that to say aser b'shvil tesish asher. If we tithe, God will see to it that we're paid back. So he says, so Shimon Shkop would say over, just like that's true when it comes to sharing tzedakah, when it comes to funds, af beruchnius. It's also true when it comes to spiritual matters, kishronos v'yedios, and when it comes to our mental abilities, our intellectual abilities, and our breadth of knowledge. Imafresh mehem meiser. If we give off meiser, if we share our knowledge, we share our intellectual skills or resources with others. Because I don't have material skills. I'm a penniless yeshiva boy in Poland. I don't have any material gifts to give, but I could share my Torah skills. So Rav Shimon Shkop used to say the same avtacha, the same guarantee applies. Yis asher, you will also become wealthy shivatayim doublefold berucho in spiritual matters, meaning the same way aser taser applies that we'll be paid back when it comes to monetary matters. Rav Shimon Shkop used to say it's the same thing when it comes to ruchnius matters. If I'm volunteering my time, volunteering my skills, my resources, Hashem will pay me back in those resources too. You'll find that's when you'll grow, you'll develop more. And he says further, Vahainu, and he says, what does that mean? Shemechiyuv tzedakah hi lehetiv b'chachma, that it is just like I have an obligation of tzedakah to share my money, I also have a chiyuv of tzedakah to share my spiritual wisdom, my Torah learning. Uliolam ein adam mafsid min tzedakah. Just like when it comes to, we have a principle that a person does not lose when they give tzedakah. So when it comes to money, if I say a person doesn't lose, Chazal tell us, aser taser, we will be paid back. Hashem will see to it that we don't become broke because I gave tzedakah. So too, if I gave my time, Hashem will see to it that I'll be able to accomplish more with my time. In that limited amount of time that I have, God will see to it that I'll accomplish more in that time because I shared with my time with others. Gam kishemanik midaito. If I share my knowledge, v'chachmaso, my wisdom, lo yechsar lo, God will not allow that to hold me back, lalos b'malos Torah, from climbing higher on the ladder of learning Torah. V'myesh talmid ben aruso, yiskel, if someone takes a student, someone is a student in their youth, yiskel lebirchas Hashem laharbos talmidim b'chayev. Then he will grow from this, and he will end up developing more students, and a person will just grow. They will not lose. Just like I don't lose financially when I give tzedakah, I will not lose intellectually by taking time away from my own learning to share with others. And now he says one more paragraph. Shamati, and I personally heard mikama bachure yeshiva. I have heard this from numerous yeshiva students. Shaloro bracha b'limudim. That let's say they just found they just weren't successful in their studies. Vispalu, and they were davening to Hashem, saying, "Come on, open my heart, help me understand Torah better." V'lonenu, and they just weren't answered. They just never felt accomplishment. V'rak, but then suddenly something changed. K'shehakdishu zman muat kol yom la'azor lebachar chalash, when they gave of their own time to help another student who was weaker than they were, who knew less than they were, zachu lebracha v'atzlacha. That's when they started to see success and doors just open up for them. V'hu b'zchusat tzedakah, and this makes perfect sense because that's the merit of tzedakah, k'moshe b'yarnu, just like what we explained. So it's such a beautiful idea. We've all heard of this when it comes to our finances, when it comes to sharing tzedakah. But we don't think about this in this other aspect too. And it's so important because first of all, not all of us are always in a position to give financially to help others. And we think, well, what can I do? We should never feel that just because I don't this month I don't have enough to share financially, I can't give tzedakah. I could always give tzedakah because it doesn't have to be finances. It could be chesed, it could be time, it could be giving a listening ear to someone, giving someone a ride, sharing, whatever it is that I'm able to share. That's tzedakah too. And just like I will never lose out because I will be paid back when it comes to financial tzedakah, I will also, the havtacha they're saying is, I will never lose out when it comes to any other form of sharing my resources as well. And if I say, what do you mean? I just don't have the time for it. Hashem will see to it that I'll be able to accomplish more in the time I have than I would have otherwise. Before I go any further, I will tell you, I was speaking to a nephew of mine a couple months ago, and he was commenting to me. He says, wow, that must be so hard. He goes, how many times do you got to speak about the same Parshas HaShavua each week? So I said, well, on Wednesday we have our ladies class. And I said, and then Friday night, I always try to give a Divrei Torah between Kabbalah, Shabbos, and Marv. It's parsha related. I'm trying to find something halacha, but parsha related. And then there's before Shacharis and Shabbos, and then there's a drasha, and then there's Shalosh Shodas. And if it's the summer months, there's also a shir. I try. It's not always parsha related, but I try. So like, how do you find like 5, 6 things on the parsha every single week? So I said to him, honestly, I have no logical explanation for you. I think it's total chesed from Hashem. And I basically say to Hashem, look, I've got these responsibilities. I'm also teaching at a school. You want me to check part of the Erev every week. You want me to do these things. You got to help me out here. And if I'm going to do this, somehow or another, I can't explain it, but just about every single week, I'm able to sit down on Friday and make a list of the stuff, the Divrei Torah I got lined up. And sure enough, I found stuff. I just happened to have seen something happened to her, something triggered my memory, and somehow or another it comes together. But I said, but I'm going to tell you what, on a week, well, let's say I'm going away for Shabbos, we're going to some family simcha, and I don't have to do that. Guess what? I don't happen to find that week. I don't have that list of 5 awesome Divrei Torah going into Shabbos that I do on another week. I said, I've got no good way to explain that. I think the whole thing is I don't think I'm incredibly skilled. I think it's a chesed from Hashem. And I think that he says, okay, you're willing to, you're spending your time doing these different communal things and serving in these various capacities. I'm going to help you out here. I think there's no other way to explain it. So I can look back in retrospect and see, let's say, binders full of stuff I found on each parsha, but I'm willing to bet you I never would have had those binders had I not taken on these various responsibilities or something. It's just, I said, and I think that's a manifestation of this. I said, I have no other way to explain it. Like, why should I? But because I'm telling you, in a week that I don't have those responsibilities, we're going to some family simcha, I don't walk into Shabbos saying like, wow, I've got 5 really, really nice things to share. I don't have that. It's just fascinating to see how that plays itself out. All right, let's go to page 2. And we're going to keep on this theme. The whole day today is going to be on this theme because I'm going to share with you some different ideas on it. So this is something you'll find this Shabbos if you're using the Art Scroll Stone Chumash on this pasuk. So on this pasuk in the Art Scroll commentary, he shares a bit on this pasuk. In his last paragraph, he writes as follows: that Jacob eventually set aside a tithe from his possessions is mentioned by Rashi 32:14, meaning when he eventually comes back to Israel after all those years at Lavan, when he comes back. So when did he ever make good on this promise, right? The Torah doesn't tell us. He made this promise, if you take care of me, then I'm going to give Meiser. So where do we find in the Torah that he did? So he says Rashi finds an allusion to it, and he points that out in 32:14. So does the Ibn Ezra in 35:14. Okay, now last 3 lines. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein stated that a Jew should tithe not only his possessions, but also his time by contributing time to the service of worthy causes. Now, he doesn't give us any source for that, but apparently this was a very common theme that Rav Moshe Feinstein would talk about. And I remember when I was in yeshiva, I remember our Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Leibowitz, he would always say this over. He would say Rav Moshe was very clear about this. That was how he would encourage guys to do JEP. Is that just like we got to get tzedakah? You guys, you don't have jobs, you're in yeshiva, like, so how are you gonna give tzedakah? This is what you're gonna do. You're gonna go take part in JEP, help out these kids in the release time, thing. That's how he would encourage us. But again, as a kid when I was in yeshiva at that time, I never, thought to ask, so where can you find this Rav Moshe? Was this in print? Was this orally? Where was this from? So I want to share with you today at least two places where we find this in print. So the first one here is fascinating. This is in his Chuvos. So I have it there to source. It says it shows for Chuvos. That was in his Responsa, Igros Moshe. That's what they were called. This is in Even HaEzer. So again, that's Even HaEzer is a section in the Shulchan Aruch that deals with marriage, divorce, stuff of that nature. So it's not where you'd expect to find it. It's the fourth volume. It's in section 26. Under some category 4. So let's see that. So at the beginning, oftentimes this is what Rav Moshe did. He'll give you a topic, a headliner. So what's his topic here? This is a lengthy responsa. Look at all the stuff he touches upon in this responsa. Isha shena yodas mi horeha. You have a woman who's not sure who her parents were. So she could have been, given up for adoption as a kid. So she doesn't know for a fact who her birth parents were. Vinasa, and now she got married im tzricha get. Does she need a get? Again, I don't know what all the circumstances of that case were. Why wouldn't she need a get? She got married, unless what he means was, we're not certain since we don't know who her parents are. Maybe she shouldn't have been married in the first place to this guy because maybe she's shouldn't be married to a Kohen. Maybe she's a mamzer. I don't know what the question. I didn't look back at the first thing. So if the marriage is ending, does she need a get? I don't know. I don't know what the circumstances in that case were because that's not. But look at the next one. Kriyas ish ben ploni al shem mi she'eno aviv aval gadlo. Let's say you have an adopted child, and I guess you want to know how does he get called into the Torah? Do you say Ruvain ben Yaakov? Even though the father that he knows is not the father that raised him, what's the proper way to call this kid up? Next one, Yeshiva Shaharbe Mitalmidea Heim B'nei Nachrias. You have a school where many of the kids in a classroom are kids of non-Jewish women. So this one I've studied, is that you have basically a teacher writing to him, I'm teaching Torah in a classroom, and I'm just beginning to notice that a lot of these kids have non-Jewish moms, so they're not halachically Jewish. Should I be teaching here? Is it wrong to teach them Torah? That was an excellent. And finally, what's the last item that he's dealing with? The fourth topic, and that's what we're going to see in a minute. Kedimas atzma lechavero b'Torah v'mitzvos. We know that there's this constant conflict in life. I got to take care of myself, but I also have to look out for others. Can you help me come up with some kind of way to balance this, taking care of my own needs when it comes to Torah and mitzvos? I got to look out for myself. God put me in this world for a limited amount of time. I got 120 years to learn as much Torah, do as many mitzvos as I can, but at the same token, I got responsibilities for the community at large. Can you help me strike that balance? So that's what we're going to be looking at, that fourth one there. But it's just fascinating. In one letter, just the range of topics here. Now look at the next slide, because oftentimes he would do this too. He would tell you who was writing to him and what the year was. So not always, but here you have it. So he says it's Yud Aleph Menachem Av Tavshin Lamed Daled. So that's 1974. Bekamp Shel Yeshiva Seinu Mesifta de Staten Island, Samoch LeEllenville. So where is he writing this letter? He's up in the Catskills. So he must have been getting a week or two off in the summer. His son, Rabbi Reuven Feinstein, who headed the yeshiva of Staten Island, they must have had a summer camp where the whole yeshiva would go in the summer to get out of the city. That was a very common thing in New York. And he says, I'm at camp. And how's he relaxing? He's there. He's just sitting at a picnic table. He's learning Torah, and he's writing letters, answers to the questions that came his way. And he's in Ellenville, New York. Now, who's he writing to? Malas Kavod Yedidi Hanechmad. I'm writing to my friend, the very honorable Rav Agon, Rav Moshe Friedman Shlita. And where is he? Rav Av based in Indianapolis. That's a hard word. You're looking at that word. I love when he does this, because you're looking at the Hebrew word. What's that Hebrew word? And then you realize that's not a Hebrew word. He's just spelling out Indianapolis, but he's put it in Hebrew letters. That's funny. I thought that's always cute. Okay, so let's see his last is this section here. So this is, again, it was a much larger tshuva. As you see, he was touching on four topics. The first three look like to be very, very weighty. And this fourth one, he's trying to help him understand how to strike a balance between taking care of oneself versus sharing with others in the community. So he says on that first line after the set period, Ach horesi, I've oftentimes said over. In other words, it sounds like this was a mantra of his. That Rav Moshe Feinstein would say over, Ach horesi, I've taught, Shekol Talmud Chacham, every Torah scholar, Av shetzorach la'atzmo, even though they have to take care of their own needs and continue their own learning. Vugadol ma'od, and that's really important. Mechuyav lilamed mixazman gam imacherim. He has to find time to learn with others. We can't just be about ourselves. We have to find time to learn with others. Afshe misbatel mitoras atzmo. Even though taking time from my busy, busy schedule is going to mean that I don't get to accomplish whatever goal I set for myself, too bad. We're not in this world just to focus on ourselves. I should have, that was triggering my memory. It's a very famous line, not the Vilna Gaon, Rav Chaim Volozhiner was a student of the Vilna Gaon. One of his sons writes about him in an introduction to his sefer that's what his father would constantly tell him. You are not in this world just to look out for yourself. You're here. You've got to be. Don't just focus on yourself. You got to focus on others. So here's Rav Moshe saying is that again. I don't care how big of a Talmud Chacham one is, and I don't care. How important it is just learning for oneself. Find time to learn with others. And he says here, even though that's going to cause you think you won't accomplish your goals. There's a famous Gemara about a teacher, a great teacher by the name of Rabbi Preda, Shalimed LaTalmud Kasha Havana, that took time to learn with a student who had a very hard time connecting the dots. We've all connected, we've all met students like this, that you got to repeat things over and over again until they get it. Or if Preda had to learn with the student, he had to go over the same lesson 400 times. Now you can imagine this Rabbi Preda had a lot of things to do on his to-do list, and he somehow found the time to learn with the student 400 times. And this is in the Gemara in Eruvin. He tells you where, Nun Dalet Amabez. Rav Preda, during the time that he took to go over this lesson 400 times with this weak student, he could have accomplished. Could you imagine what he could have done during that time for his own learning? But the Gemara tells us that God gave him a huge reward. What was it? Chai Daled Me'oshana. He gave him this huge reward that he lived this. No one was living at that time. In the Chumash, you find people living for 400 years. And that's the story in Parshas Bereshis and Noach. But you don't find that again. But something wild happened. It was almost like the Malach HaMavis forgot about him. And this Rav Preda, what was his reward? He got to live for 400 years. V'chol Doro and his entire generation, Hevi B'zchus Zel Olam Haba. That entire generation who was around during the time of Rav Preda merited Olam Haba, even if they wouldn't have done it on their own. They rode on his coattails. So that was what the Gemara tells us about Rav Preda. So he says, Shalachora hayaser, delatz v'chayarev. Someone could have argued it was usher, it was forbidden for Rav Preda to have taken so much time to learn with the student, go over the same lesson 400 times. He's got to take care of his own needs. So how do you reconcile this? Rav Preda didn't spend his entire day learning with the student. He says rather Rav Moshe Feinstein says, so how did Rav Preda do this? He obviously didn't take off 24 hours a day to learn with the student 400 times. He says, okay, I'm going to designate, let's say, an hour a day, whatever it might be. I'm going to learn a certain amount. I'm giving my tzedakah time. My tzedakah time will go to that weak student to go over the same lesson 400 times. He had set up, Rav Preda was using the system that Rav Moshe is advocating. Take away, and that Rav Meir Shapiro advocated, calling it Avodas HaKodesh time, to go ahead, the Queen's Jep time. Take some time from your schedule to share with others. Mistaber Lishu, Gamkein Shiur, Meiser, Asiris. Because it makes sense to me if you're trying to figure out how much time to take off. Meiser, figure out how much time do I spend on whatever it is, on my learning, and figure out how can I give 10% of that time. Meiser Azman, Asir Azman, Sheyesh Lo Lilmod Torah. Figure out how much time I have to learn Torah. The same way I give with my income that came in 10%. So with the time I have to learn Torah too should be 10%. Maybe you can even give more than 10%. Maybe. Mitzorachin and linear share. Because I'm not 100% sure what the amount is, but a person has to take time. We can't just be focused on ourselves. We have to designate time to learn with others. Now, again, Rav Moshe in this context here in writing is talking about sharing Torah knowledge. The note in the art scroll seems to be saying, and again, maybe this was a mantra Rav Moshe would say, that it wasn't just Torah knowledge. He was saying volunteering my time, resources. It could be time in terms of being a study partner, a mentor, but it could also be that, okay, the office needs help stuffing in. Well, whatever it is, I got to volunteer some time for a worthy cause. That's tzedakah too. Time is money. Giving of my time is important as well. So that's one place where I saw Rav Moshe said this in writing. However, I remember a couple of years ago, I stumbled on this. I did a Google search and I found here was a Jewish Observer magazine from 1973, the summer. So this is a year before this letter, because Rav Moshe said he was writing this in the summer of 74. So this is a year earlier. This Jewish Observer was the magazine of Agudas Yisrael, and they stopped publishing several years ago, probably just because there were so many other Torah publications coming out on a weekly basis. They said, we're just not gonna. Why should we try to recreate the wheel? So many people who would be writing for us as a monthly are writing on a weekly basis, and they're getting paid for it. Why should we? It's expensive to keep all this stuff going. Let them do this, find advertising. That's why I'm assuming why they stopped doing this. But anyhow, it used to be a pretty a good read. It would come out on a monthly basis, pretty much monthly. So this was from the summer of 73. So here was a whole issue that was dedicated called The Estranged American Jew. It was talking about how there was, oh yeah, look at the price on there. You see it, 50 cents, So it was, excuse me, I'm even surprised it was that high. Like 1973, doesn't that say? Actually, it was a glossy. All right. It wasn't a newspaper. It was a glossy magazine. Maybe that's why it was that high. But anyhow, so this whole issue was called The Estranged American Jew, and they had articles written. In this case, Rav Moshe Feinstein didn't write this article. You'll see someone transcribed. He gave a drasha. Probably was at some kind of a Gura event that he gave a drasha. He gave a talk, and someone transcribed it into English. But in this issue, there were many articles that different personalities, some of them were rabbinic figures, some of them were educators, other just influential American Jews writing about how do we deal with this fact that here we are in 1973, there's an incredible amount of American Jews who just don't know much, aren't hostile, and we've got to figure out put some plan in place to reach out to them. That's what. So I guess you could say this may have been kind of a turning point. Everyone looks at the year like post 6 Day War, right after the 67 war, as being a turning point when people began to realize that we aren't necessarily facing this hostile public that wants to put orthodoxy down. This is another generation that's gone on. This is just people who just don't know much more, and they might be receptive if we share some knowledge and reach out to them. People point to that point in time as really being a transformative moment, and when that Baal Tshuva movement or Kiruv movement began, a lot of people point to that post-1967 war. So here we are just a couple years later, and they're dedicating this whole issue to the estranged American Jew. So just to see, this is part of a larger article here. So what is the preface? The following essay is based on a call to action issued by a Rav Moshe Feinstein to yeshiva students in view of the extraordinary nature of our times. We believe that it has broad implications to every individual's responsibility to act on behalf of his fellow Jew. And you'll see in this, here it is in English. This is exactly what he wrote in that tshuva about Rav Preda, the student 400 times. And on the next page, you'll see at the end, he says, as it's in italics on the top of page 4. That's where you'll see his final point there. He says, as in charity, where one has an obligation to give a tenth of his income to the poor, so must one spend 1/10 of his time working on behalf of others, bringing them close to Torah. If one is endowed with greater resources, he must correspondingly spend more of his time with others. So it's fascinating because Rav Moshe wrote in the tshuva, he says, Kfar Horesi. He says, Ach Horesi. I've already spoken about this. I've already talked about this. So he wrote that tshuva in 1974. This could have been the address that he's referring to, because if they're transcribing this in 1973, maybe this was at some kind of I don't know if it was some kind of summit or some kind of convention. Who knows what it was? Maybe that's what he's referring to. I just found that fascinating. But you see, go through the proof from Rabbi Preda, learning with the student 400 times. I thought that was fascinating.
It seems like, okay, because you mentioned something that kind of just struck a chord, is that you're in this world to do as much Torah learning and mitzvahs as you can.
Yeah, we got the
So-
shopping spree
But it
almost.
doesn't say, before you exit this world, you have to go through Shas once, you have to do, you
No,
know, so it's just Torah, however you want to constitute, you have to learn.
well, I would imagine everyone's different. We got to
Right,
see, yeah,
So in other words, you're really not taking away from your Torah learning to teach someone else. You're actually in the act of Talmud Torah,
sure,
even though you know it.
right. But it could be to some degree. In other words, let's say a person says, I've got all these things I still want to learn. I've got all these other areas I haven't opened yet. I've got
To what end though?
because
But in
I
other
want to
words-
know Kol HaTorah Kula. I want to be able to say that
But again, I guess my point is that.
it's all spiritual, but it is,
Right, in other words,
I've got a desire saying that I want to know more. I want to
like
better.
a person that sits in the base measures,
Yeah.
goes through shots and goes through, everything else. And that's what he does.
But what did that mean?
And then after 120 years, he dies.
Yeah.
Okay. When he could have been taking that Torah learning and actually putting it into action.
Yeah, but what about if that person never had a chance to
No, it's
cover
just-
all? Let me ask you this. I knew a person that again, I don't know, I really don't know him well. I just knew him slightly. That when I was in yeshiva in Queens, he was someone who was living in the neighborhood. He was, a family man. He would come once a week to learn with someone in the base medrash. And I just assumed, like, wow, that's so nice. They've got a weekly chavrusa with him. And, this is going on for years. They're learning together. I found out later that this person was working on one very, very specific topic and had basically given up years. I don't want to say given up, had spent years working on this one very, very, very limited in scope topic. I couldn't help but think, like, wow, I'm really glad that has held his interest for that long. I would have gone out of my mind if that was that
Here's the
person.
Shemala, right?
Yeah.
Who is the credit that this man it gets from teaching this
Oh,
Chavrusa the same as if he had sat in a basement?
oh, so
It's the same.
no, so I'm
credit.
saying it could be credit, but it's just in terms of going out of your mind. I would imagine for my own,
That you have the
a person has to, let's say all you had the ability to do was learn Sefer Bereshis. And now someone says your job in life, you don't get to learn the rest of the Chumash. You're a Sefer Bereshis lady. And what you're going to do now is I'm going to send you and you're going to just teach Sefer Bereshis to as many people as you could come into contact with. That will be a beautiful zechus. And you will have that, you will know for the rest of your life, any of those students and the people that they share that knowledge with, it's all because of you. But won't it always kind of bother you? I want to know how the story played itself out. I never got a chance to learn Shemos, Vayikra,
It's the
Bamidbar.
process rather than the actual.
I'm not saying you won't get credit, but I'm saying for your own personal satisfaction, you might go out of your mind. I would, so now imagine someone saying they're looking at the same way. I don't want to just be limited to one book of the Chumash. I want to know the whole Chumash. Someone could have that idea when it comes to Torah and Halacha too. It could be, you're right. Will they get just as much reward? Absolutely. I have no way to know how God's rewarding, but I'm just saying for your own personal satisfaction and feeling of accomplishment might be incredibly different. And a person might feel is that it's holding me back. There's so much. Imagine, like, again, you've got a good book, you want to finish it. We're all in the middle of books we got on our night table, right? It drives you crazy when I know I want to finish this book. I got to see how the story ends. And now I imagine, like, you just keep going over the same chapter over and over again. It would drive you nuts, So that's what I'm saying. I'm not questioning the reward the person will get.
Pareda would seem like it doesn't matter. The reward that Pareda gets seems like it doesn't matter what you're learning. It matters
That you're learning.
that you're learning.
Yeah, but
if you're going to bring somebody else,
but again,
even if the person may not even be, I don't know, worthy, for lack of a better word, then, in other words, it's still, he's put on this earth to accomplish something. And that's.
yeah. No, I get you that there's reward of it, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
The other-
I would imagine it could be self-detrimental at a certain point. I get at a certain point and say, I'm just not interested in doing this anymore. I'm going out of my mind. The only way that I'm going to stay fresh and stay excited is that I'm seeing new things. I'm connecting dots. I'm making connections, seeing how one thing
I think
connects to
that's
another.
why we have to constantly go back to Bereshis every year and go through it, because there's always something new, because a lot of times even
Yeah.
people will say, I never saw this.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. 100%. 100%. We're not going to have time to do this, but the last time it's on the sheet, this is something that I remember when I was in yeshiva that that Rabbi Leibowitz shared with us on a number of occasions as well, and I thought this was a fantastic, is that this was the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer is in this is in his Chuvos. This is in the beginning to Yoredeya, he writes this, and it's a long drasha he has called Pituche Chosam, and he has a beautiful drasha. It's not important where it's based on Avram Avinu at a certain point in Sefer Bereshis, but he basically wants to make this point that we shouldn't just focus on ourselves, and we have to share with others, and don't fall into the mind trap of saying, well, if I share with others, then how am I going to have time to grow? He says it doesn't work that way. If we show HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I'm taking time for my own personal accomplishments because I want to care for your children, Hashem will find ways to make us accomplish far more in less amount of time than we would have done on our own. Given our own druthers, we never would have been able to accomplish what we did. But we'll get special siyata d'shmaya, we'll get some heavenly assistance if Hashem sees that I'm making the most of my time. But what can I do? I have to take time off to take care of your people. Hashem will make sure that we'll accomplish more. That's so the Chassam Sofer. He's got this lengthy drasha about that. This paragraph that I have on the sheet. That's where he basically, really amplifies it and spells that all out. We won't have time to do that inside now. But again, I think this all comes back to the same theme, and that's what we started with today. Was Yaakov Avinu saying that he was going to give Meiser Mikol from everything that that everything that you give me, I'm going to give Meiser on. It's not just on financial resources, but it's also on the skills, on the talents that Hashem has given us, and the time that we have. If we can share that with others, that's a form of tzedakah, and the haftachos, the guarantees that we have from Chazal about what we're rewarded for from sharing tzedakah. It's not just limited to wealth, but since this is a form of tzedakah, if we share this, Hashem will pay us back as well. And the Chassam Sofer says we'll be able to more than accomplish what it is that whatever time it is that we shared, we'll accomplish far more in the limited time that we have left for ourselves. So I think it's something that's important to review. It's something that's important to see every so often because we're all pulled in so many directions, and sometimes it can get a person could throw in the towel and say, I'm done dealing with the world. I just want to focus on myself." Is that no? It's kind of the biggest gift dealing with the world because then we can be worthy of these blessings that come from giving tzedakah. If I didn't have other people asking me, and share this with me, then I wouldn't have these other things. And again, that's what I would say. On weeks when I seem to have less on my plate, I find that I accomplish less. How do I explain that? Is because again, those are the weeks since I have less on my plate. I'm not giving as much tzedakah of my time, tzedakah of my of sharing resources, and that's why I find that I have less. It's fascinating to see it play itself out. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now. If anyone has anything they'd like to share, please feel free to